Hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. My name is Manny, and I'm here with.
John Wick, the master of the universe. You
Well,
said I could say it.
that's true. That's true. For those of you that may not know, which it's be kind of surprising, knowing that our channel talks about his works a lot. He's the the creator of 7C. My first exposure to your work was actually the first edition of Legend of the Five Rings. Well, today we're going to talk about the new 7C book. Would you mind sharing the name of that? I don't. I'm afraid I'm mispronouncing it.
It's Katai.
Katai. Okay. Now this was in Kickstarter a few years ago, and it's
Mhm.
99% done right now.
Yeah,
And
all we're waiting for is like the little fiddly bits.
okay, so what what can you tell us about what this source book is about? I know 7C source books tend to deal with almost inspired by real parts of the world.
hmm
Um, like the Crescent Empire, for example, is based on Middle Eastern mythology, culture, history. Should I assume that this is also inspired by Asian history, mythology, and culture as well?
Well, it's really so you're a fan of L5R, so you know that a long time ago we used to say L5R is not Japan.
Hmm.
Like Rokugan is not Japan. It's inspired by Japan in the same way that like Avatar the Last Airbender is inspired by, you know, things, right? But it's not so Katai in the same way that in 7th Sea, Montaigne is inspired by specifically Alexander Dumas' France, right? It's not, and that's a really important distinction, is that all of the stuff in Thea is inspired by the literature and mythology and folklore of those places and not the actual places. And mainly because I think that distinction is really important because number one, it gives a broader canvas to paint with, but also more importantly, it's I don't want people looking at any of the nations that we do in 7C and say, you know, that's not, you know, Ireland. Innismore is not Ireland, right? And say that like a criticism. I'm like, you're right, it's not,
Hmm.
right? And in the same way, all of the nations of Katai are inspired by, mainly in this case actually, less like the history, and it's never the history, right? But in this case it's less the mythology and things and more of the literature. So for example, Fuso, which has a shogun and an emperor and samurai warriors, is more inspired uh of course I'm going to say Kurosawa films because that's my one of my favorite directors, but it's also inspired by things like Stan Sakai's Usagi Yojimbo, and it's also inspired by Sony Chiba's action films. And so it's more it's more inspired by the stories than it is by the actual culture. And so it's the same thing with Han, and the same thing with the other nations as well, is that we've always been very big on the things that Europeans believed to be true are literally true in Thea. And so the things that people believe to be true in the Asian countries, the Asian nations that we're doing, are literally true in Katai.
Hmm.
So that's kind of where we're going with all that. Also, Katai is not a supplement; it is a standalone game that
Oh, really?
uses the same rules as 7C, except you can play it by itself or you can play it with 7C because they're completely compatible. But one of the things I'm really excited about Katai is how at one point really early in the development, Mike Curry, who's the lead designer who does a lot of the game mechanics, um, he came to me and said, John, I don't think there's any place in our rules where you and I roll brawn versus brawn. And I went, okay, yeah, that's true. That never happens. And he said, that means Katai heroes can have different traits
Oh, wow. Okay.
to reflect the fact that Katai heroes and Thayan heroes are very different. even if they're using the same root mechanic of, pick an approach, roll dice, spend raises to act. But the reasons that Katai heroes are taking action are very different than the reasons that Thayan heroes are taking action.
Okay.
But the system is still identical. And that inspired me a lot to think about, okay, how else can we make Katai heroes different using the same mechanics? And that was a really neat journey.
Okay. Well, before I ask you more questions about the mechanic differences, um, layout wise, is it then very similar to the core rule book where
Mm-hmm.
there's at least maybe what 150 to maybe 200 pages of lore and history?
Yeah, exactly. The first part of it is a kind of like an overview of the continental nations, and then and each one. What we tried to do is we tried to make each nation have hooks so that players can easily insert their characters into plots right away. So, for example, in going back to Fuso again, um, the uh, uh, the conflict between the shogun and the emperor is very, very strong. And so as you make characters for a Fuso character, you immediately have to pick a side, and bang, you are in the story, because that is the story of Fuso. Meanwhile, one of my favorite nations is Han, which draws its inspiration from Korea.
Hmm.
And the Emperor of Han appears to not entirely be there. He appears to believe that the Han Empire he's actually 200 years or 100 years, somewhere around that, in the past, in its golden age, because Han has fallen. Han has kind of fallen from its golden age, and he seems to think that they're still in the golden age, and so he's doing all of these weird things that don't make sense, but they really do make sense because he's playing a Hamlet. There's a method to his madness. And he's trying to restore the golden age while at the same time keep everyone from looking at him. It's a big shell game to keep people from looking at him. And immediately you make a character who serves the King of Han, and you're in a story where he's giving you orders to do these things and maintain the illusion of his madness. And so that's what we wanted to do with all of the nations, is have adventure hooks in each of the nations, big, broad, easy to fit your character into adventure hooks for each of those nations. And
Uh,
that was one of our goals.
that's really exciting. If I may ask, what came to the decision to not make this like the regular story? I mean, your source books are they're great books. And what made you decide to go in a different direction?
Because we wanted them to be different. We it's one of my one of the things that someone asked me, what's the Jared Sorensen 3 questions, which is, what is your game about, how does it do it, and what mechanics does your game reward, is this little game design tool that Jared Sorensen taught me, and it goes into my toolbox with my other game design tools. But I always pull that out because it's kind of like a compass. And you ask the question, what's your game about? And for me, it's always been the same answer, actually. It's always been, what does it mean to be a hero? And for me, that's a provocative question, because what it means to be a hero in Alexander Dumas' France is different than what it means to be a hero in 17th century Korea. And when you look at those in contrast to each other, the character from the Han character would look at the Montaigne character, and they would look at each other and go, you have the features of a villain, and yet they're both essentially trying to do the same thing, which is the heroic act of ease suffering and make things better for other humans.
Oh, okay.
But they express it in very different ways. For the Western hero is all about society is corrupt. I know the right way, and I will do what I know is right and not be hindered by what other people tell me. And if you think about traditional Western heroes, it's all about ego. It's all about me. I know. I will do. I will overcome. And then you know, and then you get the back end of the Joseph Campbell hero cycle, right? Where you go back home and you've grown too big for your home and all that kind of stuff. So you get that. But the Eastern hero, the way that they express heroism is by diminishing or subduing their ego, by saying you have a society or destiny says you have a role to play and fulfill that role. And the longer that you say, no, that is not my role, I will deny that, the world starts punching on you and starts punishing you and starts crushing you under the wheel until you admit and you submit to the role that you have been born to. And so when you look at classic heroes from both examples, the Western hero would look at that and go, no, don't do what society tells you to do. Don't tell what other people tell you to do. You do what you feel is right. And then the Eastern hero says, what a pompous ass you are. You have a role to play. Play your role. And those two things do not mesh. And so when we were talking about Katai, we were talking about, okay, how are we going to make Eastern heroes different than Western heroes? And one of the ways is how you earn hero points. So the Eastern hero earns hero points when they have a destiny that's on your character sheet. This is my destiny. And when you act toward that destiny, you get hero points. As opposed to the hero who has a story. This is my story. I am going to do this thing. And or my quirks, right? I have quirks. And when I act in certain ways, I get hero points. When the captain doesn't leave the ship until everybody else is off of it, right? That's one of the Western hero quirks, as opposed to the Eastern hero quirk, who would earn, the Eastern hero quirks are based more on duty and on destiny, and so that's how they're different.
Okay, wow.
It really comes back to Legend of the Five Rings, which when I designed the role-playing game, the real core idea is that all of the clans have a different definition of Bushido. What is the right way? And the fact of the matter is they're all right. And so when the Lion Clan samurai and the Crab Clan samurai meet, and he says, you don't know anything about Bushido. And then Lion Clan says, no, you don't know anything about Bushido. And then they talk. And for me, that's the interesting part, is when those two conflicting philosophies meet and clash. And so that's why and so for the same reason, for 7th Sea, for Thea and Katai, I wanted to have that same clash, because I think it's interesting.
Being that you worked on first edition Legend of Five Rings and now doing this project, was your approach in any way different this time around than it was previously?
Yeah, because I learned a lot more. And L5R was kind of a first swing. It's like whenever you do something for the first time, you fail, right? At some degree, you're going to fail at some degree, or you're going to fall short, or whatever. My big failure in the first edition L5R, because I couldn't think of a way around it, was I said that all of Rokugan adheres to the lion definition of Bushido. And so if you don't act like a lion, then you fall short. You lose honor. And what I should have done is I should have said what I said before, is like all the clans have a definition of Bushido. And so when you act like your clan, then you get honor points. And if you're the scorpion who goes and says, hey buddy, there's a trap over here that I know about and you shouldn't walk into, they lose honor points because they're not acting like their clan expects. and that's what I should have done. And so when we started doing Katai, that was a big that was something that I learned from after, was it 20 years of doing Legend of the Five Rings, after doing that, of yeah, that this is, you know, something that we should do. Also, just the basic system of the basic 7C system, which comes from a conversation, a joking conversation that James Ernest and I had at a game design seminar. And James was half joking and half serious, like almost everything that James says. And he said, there's really only two kinds of games. There's move and roll and move. And he said, move and roll is like all the Warhammer style games, all the board games. You move your mans and then you roll to see if the thing that you planned on doing worked. And then roll and move is like Clue, where you roll the dice and you go, okay, I have enough movement to go to the lounge or the conservatory. How do I want to use my roll? Mm. And I was sitting next to him and I said, I don't think there's any such thing as a move and roll role-playing game. Because all of them are, you tell the GM what you do and then you roll dice and you see if you're successful. That's move and roll. And so when we started designing Legend or 7th Sea, second edition, I went, let's try to do a roll and move role-playing game where you tell the GM, these are your stats, you roll dice, and those tell you how many actions you can get, and then you decide your actions based on the dice you roll. And of course, Legend of the Five Rings is a move and roll role-playing game, because I designed it back in 1996, 97, something like that. And if I had known better, I would have made it a move and roll game. I don't think I will ever make a move and roll role-playing game again.
So let's talk about like character creation. What are there? What if for someone new to this? Is there guides of I guess you could say templates of who or what you can be?
It's really simple. You pick which nation you're from, and that informs a lot of your choices. It doesn't dictate all your choices, but it informs a lot of your choices. And then you get two backgrounds, just like in regular second edition 7th Sea. And backgrounds are things that you were. So you were a pirate and you were a noble, or you were a bushi and you were a assassin, right? So these are the things that you were up to this point. And we can include things like assassin because then you get the character who wants to redeem themselves for their past actions, which is a big heart thing of mine and Mike Curry's too. So, I mean, that whole redeemed or fallen paladin person who's trying to redeem themselves, that's gotta, I mean, that's like in every culture has that. Every culture has that story because it's a human story, right? So you pick your nation, pick two backgrounds. From your backgrounds, you get skills and you get advantages that just make you distinguish you from other characters. And then you're pretty much ready to go. Your advantages tell you whether you have sorcery or not, but sorcery is different in Katai because it's more like spiritualism than sorcery, because that is, again, the difference between the East and the West. But from there, I mean, it takes 5 minutes to make a character. But the choices that you make, that's the big thing, is like in some games, it's like, do I carry a broadsword or a bastard sword? Oh, it's a choice. It's like, that's not a choice. That's not a choice. That's whether you want to roll a D8 or a D10, who cares about that? The choices that you make are really significant. Oh, and the other thing that you pick is a destiny. It's like, this is the next chapter of my story. Is I am destined to do this thing. And that, of course, has an effect on a huge effect on your character.
So it has a similar, like, how like in the first book has 20 questions.
Mm-hmm.
It's a similar format like that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So if I may ask, I know players are always thinking of ways of customizing characters. So
yeah.
Sounds like this book is very, it's you can use it for any it's compatible with all the 7th Sea second edition books.
Yes.
It's how much Frankensteining can you do with these characters? So like, can you take certain quirks? Could all these quirks are interchangeable from the main core rulebook and Katai, um, uh, and so forth? Like how
Oh
much?
yeah. I mean, I would be a hypocrite, especially after the video. I'm just because I'm doing the 31-day character challenge, where I take a different game every day and make a character from each game. And today I just posted the D&D, my D&D monster. It's like I want to make a character from the monster manual. And I made a Mind Flayer Paladin.
Oh, okay.
So so I'd be a hypocrite if I said, no, you can't custom tailor your character. No, as a matter of fact, someone sent me a meme that said in this tiny span of time, this tiny envelope of time, it was possible to have an adventuring party on Earth that included a pirate, a samurai, essentially a not a steampunk, but a Nikolai Tesla like character experimenting with electricity, and a cowboy, and something else that I can't remember. And it was like there's a span of time where on Earth it was possible to have all these things, and I'm like, that's beautiful. It's all of these different cultures, coming together and showing the true diversity of humanity. I love the fact that in 7th Sea right now, even the backers have the backers have the PDF of Katai right now before we put in like the index and a couple other things, where you could have a Khazaria character who is the analog um for Kublai Khan and the Mongols, a Khazarian character with a Montaigne duelist and a Vidache Fate Witch, and a character from one of the books that I'm working on right now, which is the Land of a Thousand Nations. So a character from the Sertepe nations, the Sertepe alliance, and all together in one group. And that's like the beautiful I'm trying to think of non-cliche terms, but this wide range of flavors that humanity is. Different languages, different beliefs, different mythologies, all of these things. And when you really, really boil it down, what it means to be a hero to each of these cultures is helping people. Right? That's really what it boils down to. When you take away all of the trappings, all of the different, like all the different the different traditions, because tradition is peer pressure from dead people. But if you take away all of the different traditions, if you look at what they mean, it's what does it mean to be a hero? This person put themselves in front of danger to help someone else. And that's really what 7th Sea is about, is like, what does it mean to be a hero in this place? This. What does it mean to be a hero in this place? Pretty much the same thing. Right? And that's the expression that I want 7th Sea to have. The other really nice thing that Mike did, this is Mike's idea, was that all of the rules are modular in that you can pull them out and it doesn't affect any of the other rules. So, for example, if you like the traits from Katai, you can pull them out and put them in and replace the traits in Thayan 7th Sea. You can just replace them.
Interesting.
Because it doesn't affect anything else, right? Same thing with the skill set. Just pull the skills out. And the brutes, the rules for brutes and the rules for villains are just a little bit different. But you could pull them out and replace the brutes in 7th Sea Thea, or vice versa. If you're like, these are fun, but I really like my Thayan brutes, so I'm going to take my Thayan brutes and I'm going to plug them in. So the whole game is plug and play. So you can switch around, make your own version of the 7th Sea system, because everything is pretty much standalone. Everything is modular. So you can go from there.
Is there anything else about this world that you're excited to see?
I have been doing it's funny with this game. This will be the essentially the third samurai game that I've done. I did Legend of the Five Rings, and then I did a game called Blood and Honor, which was using my Houses of the Blood rules to do Samurai Tragedy. And now with this, it's like a third swing at fantasy samurai. They're fun, but the Nation of Han I really like a lot. It's very desperate. What's going on in Han is essentially they're being crushed, and the King of Han is trying to save his nation, while at the same time, because of Shenzhou, which is the Chinese analog, is trying to expand its borders, and in doing that, it's crushing Han. And what do you do against the overwhelming power of a nation that's essentially 10 times bigger than you? What can you do? And I love that kind of desperate, against all odds. We have no hope of winning, but we're not going to roll over. And I really like that a lot.
Okay. Should I assume the same artists that have worked on previous books be working on this book as well?
Actually, we had some of the previous artists, but we wanted the book to look differently. So we used a lot of different artists to make the book look, like I said, some of them are the same and some of them are different. And a lot of it was, how are we going to make this different? And so part of that is by choosing different artists.
What's next? What's the next project going to work on after you finish Katai?
Well, we're almost done with. I've been working on Land of a Thousand Nations, which is all of the North American lands, and I've been working on that with two people. One of them is Derek Pounds. Derek is a First Nations. He's a First Nations guy from the West Coast. Big 7th Sea fan, and really, really helpful in making sure that we got the tone and the language and everything else right. Whenever I wrote anything, I sent it to him and said, okay, tell me if I stepped on a landmine, because I don't know where they are. Right. And I spent a lot of time doing research and a lot of time doing a lot of reading. But more than that, also doing a lot of talking. And I have, because I live here in Phoenix, Arizona, and I have there's a lot of people around here that I can talk to, and doing that reading and talking and having Derek essentially be my pigeon in the mine, right? And there have been times where I was like, oh sure, one of our backgrounds can be brave, right? You can be a brave. And he was like, no, you cannot do that. I was like, oh, okay. I have no idea. He's like, I know you had no idea. He's not that mean. He's actually a real sweetheart. He's a really nice guy. And David Larkins is the other guy who's been helping me out. David Larkins at Chaosium is the line developer or the line editor is what they call it at Chaosium, for the Pendragon role-playing game, but lives in Santa Fe and in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And, like Derek, has a lot of knowledge. And so this book, out of all the 7th Sea books, has been really, it's the one that I learned the most from, because I know about Europe, right? And I have a sense of history of the Middle East. I studied some part of Central America, although I learned a ton from the Central American book and all that. And I didn't do that book. Some other people did that book, right? But still reading it, I was like, oh, wow, this is really interesting. But working on the Land of a Thousand Nations has been really, it's been an experience that I won't forget. The next project we're working on is the Thousand Nations book that Derek Pounds and David Larkins and I are working on. Derek is kind of like our guide through the book to make sure that we don't step on any landmines and things. But the other thing that we're working on that I'm really excited about, and I'm excited about both of them, is the 7th Sea starter set. which is going to be like the Call of Cthulhu starter set and the RuneQuest starter set. It's a book that's got everything you need to start playing 7th Sea, and it's going to have some really neat things in it that you've never seen in a starter set before.
Mm. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. And to our viewers out there, when the book comes out, I'll put a link in the description or in the comments below so you can go ahead and get it as soon as possible. And yeah, stay safe out there. Get your shots and have a great day.
I got mine.